Die Evolution von Assassin's Creed 2003 bis 2022 gucken wir uns an von Flatlife. Ja, bin mal sehr gespannt drauf, wurde ja mehrmals empfohlen.
In 2003, Ubisoft was working on a spin-off series for The Prince of Persia. But what they didn't know was this would be the start of a major series. Since the first Assassin's Creed was released in 2007.
Genau, also viele wissen es ja, glaube ich, doch noch nicht, dass Assassin's Creed 1 eigentlich ein Prince of Persia DLC sein sollte. Was natürlich unglaublich krass ist, dass das zu so einer gigantischen Spieleserie geführt hat. Prince of Persia und den Grundstein gelegt hat. Und ja, servus, vielen Dank für die 6 Monate Twitch Prime.
People from all around the world started to love the open world, stealth, brutal combat, and parkour that would become the foundation of the Assassin's Creed games. The series had its ups and downs, but even 15 years later, Assassin's Creed is still going strong.
Genau.
This is the evolution of Assassin's Creed. After completing
Ich habe auch ein Skript für so ein Video geschrieben. Ich glaube Anfang 2020. Das ist sicherheitshalber nie rausgekommen.
Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time in 2003, a game designer named Patrice Desilets was instructed to begin on the next Prince of Persia game. Initially, the game was supposed to be a linear PlayStation 2 game. However, during development, more information became known about the next-generation PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Hearing about the capacities of these next-generation consoles, Patrice and his team considered expanding Prince of Persia by creating an open-world game with acrobatic gameplay. During development, the game's title was Prince of Persia: Assassin. The protagonist of the game would be Altair.
Total krass, ne? Sie haben einfach ein weit ambitionierteres DLC sich ausgedacht, als das, was Prince of Persia war. Total genial.
A heroic character with a badass edge. Altair means bird of prey in Arabic, and an eagle would become an iconic part of the franchise. A next-generation game engine named Scimitar Engine was created to support the open world, which was entirely new for the team. The engine allowed for more fluid wall climbing and other animations. Level designers and artists were creating historical structures, but what made it very challenging was that nearly every building had to be climbable while still holding the game's historical appearances. This helped to give players the feeling of freedom in the open-world game.
Ist natürlich so eine Sache, ne? Es ist ja immer der Mix aus, du findest die Umkleidekabine auf dem Dach, um dich zu verstecken, und den Wagen mit Heu, aber hast trotzdem noch eine gewisse Grundimmersion, ein gewisses Einfühlungsvermögen in das historische Setting, und das war für die damalige Zeit schon ziemlich gut. Die Steuerung ist natürlich absolut klobig, aber ich glaube für damals auch okay gewesen. Ich erinnere mich noch an ganz andere Zeiten, wo ich irgendwie am PC Gothic gespielt habe und Steuerung, Pfeiltaste nach vorne gedrückt habe, um irgendwas zu machen. Also ja, das war schon nicht schlecht für 2007, oder? Habt ihr das 2007 schon gespielt, Leute? Schreibt's gerne mal rein.
While the PlayStation 2 could only support 8 characters on the screen for the Sands of Time, the next-generation consoles were able to support up to 120 people. These crowds allowed for social stealth, where the main characters could hide in the crowds. After 2 years of development, the fundamentals of gameplay were completed. Player-controlled Altair would originally be Prince's bodyguard and would rescue the prince from various situations. However, Ubisoft wasn't keen on releasing a Prince of Persia game where the prince was not the lead character, so the name was changed to Assassin's Creed, which led to the start of a whole new franchise. The first Assassin's Creed was released in 2007 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The first game takes place in the Holy Land in 1191. You become Altair, a superior assassin who's been disgraced and must earn his respect back by finding and eliminating 9 men. The first Assassin's Creed became the foundation of gameplay for the rest of the series. The game is set in an open-world environment with various regions of the Holy Land, such as Damascus and Jerusalem. One of the great features of the game is parkour. Almost all buildings are climbable, allowing Altair to climb even the highest towers and jump from them in haystacks. Another important feature is, of course, stealth, which allows you to sneak up to guards and kill them silently with your hidden blades. The original game was a huge success.
Alleine krass, dass sie sich diese ganze Lore, also man weiß natürlich nicht, wie viel haben sie sich ausgedacht für das Prince of Persia DLC, aber das Produkt, was daraus geworden ist, ist ja wirklich schon ein bisschen weiter davon ab. Ja. Und hallo Mama, ich bin auf YouTube, sagt Winterherz. Moin Winterherz, du bist auf YouTube wahrscheinlich, ja.
Which led to the start of a new franchise for Ubisoft. Assassin's Creed received generally positive reviews for its story, originality, parkour, and visuals. I mean, these graphics are truly incredible for its time. Even today, they look good. The game also won some awards, including Best Action Adventure Game by IGN and Best PS3 Action Game by GameSpot. However, it was criticized for the easy one-button combat and the repetitive gameplay. IGN said about the game, quote, "If you play Assassin's Creed for an hour, you will probably think it's a fantastic game. But as Assassin's progresses, its dual storyline and repetitive quests begin to grow tiresome." Overall, the game received a score of 81 on Metacritic. In total, a whopping 8 million copies of the game have been sold.
Nicht schlecht, 8 Millionen. Cyberpunk hat, glaube ich, bis dato 18 Millionen verkauft.
Fun fact, Assassin's Creed is inspired by Alamut, a novel that was published in 1938.
Eigentlich müssen wir mal Alamut zusammen lesen, oder? Die große Alamut-Lesung.
Many elements of the book's plot can be found in the game, including the quote, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted," which is the guiding principle of the game, Assassin Brotherhood.
Nothing is true, everything is permitted. To say that nothing is true is to realize that the foundations of society are fragile and that we must be the shepherds of our own civilization.
In 2009, the sequel, Assassin's Creed 2, was released. This time, the game takes place during the Italian...
Also ich muss sagen, ich hatte ja immer so einen großen Grafiksprung im Kopf. Hier sehe ich den jetzt nicht. Hier sehe ich den nicht. Aber es gibt natürlich auch die Remastered, halt die Trilogy-Reihe. Die sieht ja schon was besser aus. Vielleicht deswegen. Und ich glaube, Brotherhood ist dann nochmal doch ein bisschen besser. Die Kutschfahrt, ey.
The main character is Ezio Auditore, who seeks revenge against those responsible for the death of his father and brothers. Ubisoft wanted to significantly improve Assassin's Creed with the sequel and tripled the development team's size to 450 members. Assassin's Creed 2 was developed using a newly updated game engine, allowing for better graphics and new features in the game, such as swimming and eagle vision.
Alleine, dass du als Altair ständig im Wasser gestorben bist. Das war doch legendär, oder? Das war doch legendär. Ich bin gerade ein bisschen überfordert mit dem Chat über mir. Habt ihr das gemerkt? Gebt gerne mal Feedback. Kann man das lesen oder nicht? Und wenn ja, auf welchem Endgerät guckt ihr?
To identify specific people and landmarks. To improve the combat system became more complex. There were also more weapons in the game, such as maces, axes, and daggers. While the game progresses, players can purchase artwork, dye Ezio's clothing, or obtain new armor. Another improvement was the story. Instead of having the same mission structure of finding information and killing the target, Assassin's Creed 2 had a more expansive story that also had secret missions and a backstory of the modern world.
Und
Assassin's
DLCs.
Creed 2 was very well.
DLCs, die eigentlich als das Hauptspiel rauskommen sollten. Black Flag Musik, episch, ja, auf jeden Fall episch. Und vielleicht an der Stelle nicht ganz passend, kam ja eben schon das Feedback von euch.
Received. In fact, it is considered one of the best video games ever made. Games Radar, who gave the game the highest score possible, said, quote, "A huge improvement over the first game. Assassin's Creed 2 offers up an enormous, beautiful open world that's easy to get lost in. an epic storyline, and all the fun that comes from creatively killing villains and tearing across 15th century rooftops at ridiculous speeds. The PS3 version received an impressive score of 91. In total, over 9 million copies of Assassin's Creed 2 have been sold.
Für die Verdreifachung des Teams, aber nur 1 Million mehr verkauft, ist es natürlich schlecht. So im Verhältnis. Aber für die Marke an sich absoluter Meilenstein. Und ich kann mir kaum vorstellen, dass wirklich bis heute nur 9 Millionen verkauft sind. Krass. Andererseits war Cyberpunk das meistgehypte Spiel 2020 so, wenn man das im Vergleich setzt und es halt doppelt so viel verkauft wurde. Also ist schon viel, ja.
Fun fact, while you're parkouring over buildings in Assassin's Creed 2, an NPC can be heard saying, "Another caped crusader," which is a Batman reference. In 2010 came the direct sequel to Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Brotherhood is not numbered, unlike Assassin's Creed 2, because players would have expected a new setting and a new ancestor, while this game continues Ezio's story. This time, Ezio can...
Auch für damals die Trailer, ne? Die sahen echt bombastissimo aus. Also, was war das jetzt? 2009 wahrscheinlich dann, ne? Oder 10? War auf jeden Fall
continues his fight against the Templars in Rome, where he attempts to rebuild the Assassin Brotherhood and tries to liberate the city from Borgias's control. Meanwhile, the protagonist of the 21st century is Desmond Miles, who, with the aid of a machine called the Animus, relives the memories of his assassin ancestor Ezio Auditore to find a way to avert the 2012 apocalypse. The combat system had several improvements. For example, offensive actions, like striking first, were more efficient to increase the pace of the fighting. Ezio can also throw heavy weapons, such as axes, spears, and swords, at his enemies.
Das
A new feature of the game
Bombardment-Intro.
is the ability to recruit new members and send them on missions. The game also introduces multiplayer for the first time in the series. The multiplayer mode includes a leveling system, and players can unlock abilities, perks, and streaks. Players can either fight cooperatively or against each other in the different multiplayer modes. Just like its predecessor, most people loved the game. The new setting of Rome.
Gab doch letztens erst die Ankündigung, dass der Online-Support eingestellt wurde von Assassin's Creed 2. Auf Frag müsste das jetzt offline sein. Es gab allerdings einen Kommentar, der besagt hat, dass sie Assassin's Creed wieder von der Liste runtergenommen haben und es ein Fehler war. I don't know.
Gameplay improvements, multiplayer, and story were praised. GameSpot said about Brotherhood, quote, "This may not be Assassin's Creed 2, but like Ezio's smirk, Brotherhood is too irresistible to ignore." Overall, the game received a score of 90, and in total, 7.2 million copies were sold. 1 year later, Assassin's Creed Revelations was released.
Zu Revelations muss man sagen, ne, es ist halt, ja, also meiner Meinung nach so ist das Ende von Revelations das geilste Ende, was es jemals in einem Assassin's Creed Spiel gab. Aber ansonsten für mich nicht besonders erinnerungswürdig. Bis auf das Minispiel, das war lustig.
Tower Defense. Trilogy. This time, players can explore Constantinople freely, follow the main storyline, or do side missions. The game adds several new features, most notably the hook blade, which allows Ezio to climb much faster, jump over large gaps, and access zip lines across the open world. It can also be used in combat and allows for new moves, such as a combo attack or grappling enemies. Players can also craft bombs. And the multiplayer mode was expanded with additional maps, characters, and game modes. The game received a score of 80 points, which is 10 points less than its predecessor. By this time, players slowly began feeling some fatigue with Ezio, so it was best to make the next game in the series absolutely different. In total, 7 million copies of the game were sold.
Ja, also da war es, glaube ich, dann, wie schon gesagt, das erste Mal, dass wirklich die Leute gedacht haben, okay, jetzt reicht's. Ähnlich, was gerade bei Valhalla ist, ne? Und nach dem dritten Spiel quasi hat es dann gereicht. Und dann musste ein bisschen was anderes passieren.
Originally, the game was developed for the Nintendo.
Für mich ist Revelations der beste Teil der Ezio-Reihe, sagst du. Ach krass, Melfor. Für mich nur das Ende. Aber das reicht schon, um es spielenswert zu machen, finde ich. Weil das ist so toll inszeniert worden. Haben wir uns ja neulich erst angeguckt.
3DS and called Assassin's Creed Lost Legacy. It was even announced during Nintendo's E3 2010 press conference. However, the game was quietly canceled and instead, Assassin's Creed Revelations was released for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC instead. In 2012, Assassin's Creed 3 was released for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii U, and PC. This time, the main story...
Wii U? What the heck? What the heck? Wii U? Wusste ich gar nicht mehr.
It was set during and after the American Revolution in the 18th century. Instead of Ezio, the main protagonist of the game is Connor Kenway, Desmond's half-English, half-Mohawk ancestor. It was the biggest open world in the series so far, and players could explore 18th century
Ich meine, Kenway
Boston,
Saga an
New
sich
York, and
ist
the
schon
American
spannend
frontier.
irgendwie verstrickt. AC3 ist aber nicht mein Favorit. Die Trailer waren aber auch wieder absolut krass. Und ich weiß, dass in diesem Trailer tatsächlich ein Copyright-geschützter Track verbaut wurde. Genau, deswegen.
2.5 years developing the game, which was more than any other Assassin's Creed game. During this time, developers created a new game engine for its gameplay, and many new features were added. For example, free running was more fluid. Now players could also climb on trees and mountains. Another new feature was the weather simulation with different seasons. In the winter, there's snow, which reduces the visibility of the enemies, improving the stealth. The game also adds animals, such as horses, cows, dogs, deer, wolves, and bears. The wild animals can be found in the frontier and can be hunted. Just like its predecessor, the game also has a multiplayer, allowing players to compete online or play in teams. Assassin's Creed 3 was positively received and praised for the new setting, gameplay, story, and scale of the game. GameSpot said in a review, "It takes chances with its opening, with its story, and with its characters. It expands the series' gameplay in enjoyable and sensible ways. As with many ambitious games, not every arrow fired hits the bullseye, yet this big, narratively rich sequel is easy to get invested in." Overall, Assassin's Creed 3 received a score of 85 and it became the most sold game in the franchise with over 12 million.
Ich persönlich habe AC3 auch nicht wirklich so sehr geschätzt. Also AC4, AC2, AC Brotherhood, Origins, Odyssey.
Copies sold.
Valhalla.
Fun fact, scalping was planned initially as a tactic Connor could use in Assassin's Creed 3. The developers thought it was too graphic. What a pity. Next came one of the most successful Assassin's Creed titles. Ubisoft questioned themselves. How do we mix Assassin's Creed and pirate fantasy? It was a mad idea and a massive shift from the initial Assassin's story. So Ubisoft took a huge risk back then. And it was worth it.
Total geil. Also meiner Meinung nach ist Black Flag, was Gameplay und Gameplay-Motivationen angeht, bis heute einer der stärksten Teile. Alleine ständig das Schiff aufzuwerten.
In 2013, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag was released initially for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Wii U. 1 month later, the game was also released for the new Xbox One and PlayStation 4. The game is set in the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy in the 18th century. The main story follows notorious pirate Edward Kenway. For the first time in the series, ship-based exploration is a major part of the game. The world opens up much sooner than its predecessor, and it has a more open-world feel. You were given immense freedom to explore different territories, hunt for animals, upgrade your ship, search for treasures, and fight in epic naval battles. Most people loved the open-world gameplay, side quests, graphics, naval combat, and pirate theme. God is a Geek said about the game, "It's yet another example of what the 360 and the PS3 are capable of. A genuinely stunning creation that packs 40 to 50 hours of content into a beautiful, compelling world."
Wirklich nur 40, 50 Stunden? Krass. Krass. Aber damals waren Games noch nicht so groß und ein Großteil von Black Flag war wahrscheinlich wirklich nur Wassermasse und keine echten Orte, die man noch weiterhin erkunden konnte. Vielen, vielen Dank auf jeden Fall nochmal an Dingoletta, die hier nochmal einen Sub raushaut, und an Servus Virus. Ich weiß gar nicht, ob ich mich schon bedankt habe. Herzlichen Dank euch.
That begs to be explored. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag got a score of 88. It even became one of the best-selling games of 2013, and in total, 15 million copies have been sold.
Verdient. Ich fand aber auch krass, dass der Step bei Assassin's Creed 3 wieder so groß war, also wieder so viel mehr verkauft wurde, einfach weil es wahrscheinlich anders war als vorher.
Fact, Black Flag had a huge open world with about 60% water and 40% land.
Ach krass, doch
the
so
world
viel
was
Land.
so big that sailing across the entire world would take more than half an hour. The 7th major installment in the Assassin's Creed series is Assassin's Creed Rogue. The main plot is set during the French and Indian War from 1752 to 1760. The gameplay is very similar to Black Flag, but in an Arctic setting. It did add some new features, like new weapons, combat mechanics, ship-based weapons, and enemies can board the Morrigan, which is the player's ship. Rogue was intended to fill the gaps of the story between Assassin's Creed 3 and Black Flag. The main character doesn't assume the role of an assassin, but instead becomes a Templar, which was a special fan request.
Auf jeden Fall. Sehr, sehr cooler Twist, meiner Meinung nach. Und war wie so ein kleines Black Flag. Mir hat es ganz gut gefallen. Also war eins der positiveren Assassin's Creed.
Assassin's Creed Rogue wasn't as well received as the previous games in the series. IGN said in a review about the game, quote, "Story aside, much of Rogue feels redundant, repetitive, and ultimately in need of reinvention." Rogue only received a score of 72.
Quasi Black Flag
After the
klein.
completion
Ja,
of 2010 Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Ubisoft decided to split the developers into different teams. One of those teams started working on a whole new
Trailer sehen so bombastisch aus.
Assassin's Creed title. Rogue was an alarm for stagnation, so fans were eager to get their hands on something new.
Absolut krass, ey.
In November 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity was released for PC, PlayStation 4, and the Xbox One.
War das erste, was quasi ausschließlich auf der neuen Generation war, ne? Soweit ich das. Und es gab, glaube ich, auch ein Engine-Upgrade. Sah dann natürlich nochmal erheblich besser aus als alle Teile davor, aber Unity ist nicht mein Favorite-Teil. Ich finde, der spielt sich sehr klobig. Was aber cool ist, ist so.
The main story is set in Paris during the French Revolution from 1789 to 1794. It introduces Arnaud Dorian, who exposes the true powers behind the revolution while seeking revenge on those responsible for his adoptive father's murder. In the 4 years it took to create Unity, developers revamped the combat, parkour, and stealth. The game also introduced a cooperative multiplayer for the first time in the series, allowing up to 4 players to engage in missions and explore the open world.
Von der Idee her cool.
Another first is the ability to customize the player's abilities with a skill tree that enables players to use their points to improve skills in stealth, health, melee, and ranged combat. Weapons, armor, and equipment can also be customized to the player's liking. The game was praised for its stunning graphics, customization options, and recreation of Paris. However, the game was filled with hilarious bugs and glitches. In fact, there were...
Sie ist hier einfach am Kraulschwimmen. Apropos Kraulschwimmen, vielen Dank an Eis, der Melfor ein Abo raushaut, und an Dingoletta, die Ciao 1 schenkt. Vielen, vielen Dank euch für die Unterstützung. Ja, Unity war zum Start her sehr verbuggt. Man sagt ja über Valhalla, es sei verbuggter als Unity zum Start. Ich weiß gar nicht, ob das Ja, also sind beide sehr, sehr stark, was Bugs
Were
angeht.
so many that Ubisoft had to come up with a massive 40-gigabyte patch, which became one of the biggest in gaming history. PC Gamer even said, Unity, in its current state, can only be considered a failed revolution. Many people also weren't a fan of the mission design of co-op multiplayer, as some missions were impossible to play solo. With the huge backlash at its release, Ubisoft knew they had to come into action, and so fixed most technical issues and made other improvements. Unfortunately for Ubisoft, many people had already left their bad reviews, and now it is considered to be an underrated and underappreciated title in the Assassin's Creed series. The game scored 70 points for the PlayStation 4, which is the lowest score of all Assassin's Creed games. Combined with Assassin's Creed Rogue, over 10 million copies were sold. Fun fact, Assassin's Creed...
Warte mal, combined with...
Combined with Assassin's Creed Rogue, over 10 million copies were sold. Fun fact.
Okay, das ist natürlich nicht so stark für beide zusammen, ne?
Assassin's Creed modeled the Notre Dame Cathedral down to the brick, which was a process that took Ubisoft 2 years to complete. When on 15 April 20...
Kam ja gleichzeitig, stimmt, Rogue war ja so ein bisschen die Entschuldigung für die PS3-Spielerschaft und das Xbox-Äquivalent, die dann noch das alte Ding da stehen hatten, aber auch in Assassin's Creed spielen wollten. Und damals war es ja nicht unmöglich, eine PS4 zu kriegen, wie es heute bei der PS5 aussieht. Also, ich glaube, man kann sich immer noch schlecht einen PS5 Exclusive oder so leisten. Also, die PS4 ist ja wirklich immer noch vorherrschend. Ja, krass, das Notre Dame Feuer. 2019 war es. Ich weiß noch, wir hatten da auch dann Unity gestreamt und uns die Notre Dame nochmal in Unity angeguckt. Echt genial, dass Ubisoft die so genau vermessen hat für den Wiederaufbau, der ja immer noch läuft.
2019, the roof of the Notre Dame caught fire. Many believed that Assassin's Creed Unity could help to renovate the cathedral due to the detail of the Notre Dame in-game. Eventually, Ubisoft was never involved in the reconstruction, but they donated 500,000 euros to the reconstruction of the cathedral and also provided Unity as a free download for a week.
Das auf jeden Fall, aber auf Falk haben die doch das 3D-Modell zur Verfügung gestellt. Heißt ja nicht, dass sie aktiv daran arbeiten, ne? Aber ja. Hey, Frage, wie steht's? Ich habe gestern Atlantis DLC angefangen und muss an dich denken. Jo, viel Spaß im Atlantis DLC. Kann ich dir empfehlen. Sehr gutes DLC, aber du weißt wahrscheinlich schon selbst, dass es cool ist.
You want a chance to explore the modeled cathedral in-game. In 2015, Assassin's Creed Syndicate was released for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. The story is set in London in 1868 and follows not just one, but two lead protagonists. These are twin assassins Jacob and Evie Fry. Both characters have their own specialties. While Evie is more stealth-focused, Jacob is better in close combat. The game is in many ways similar to Unity, but does add new traveling systems, such as a rope launcher, carriages, and a train. It also has a refined combat and stealth mechanics. The world is also much larger than any previous
Alter, die Themse, ne? Komplett vollgeballert mit Schiffen. Absurd.
title. Unlike its predecessor, the game
Aber
has
war
no
lustig
multiplayer mode. Opinions about the game differ.
Seilwerfer.
While some, like GameSpot, praised the game and called it a triumphant return to form for a franchise and presents a beautifully structured tale with heart and soul to spare, others, like The Telegraph, said, Syndicate is a massive shame. Ubisoft's yearly development cycle is really beginning to leave its mark on the series. It is a series that can be great, but unfortunately, Syndicate is a misstep. With a score of 76, Syndicate does have a higher score than Unity. In total, over 5.5 million copies have been sold.
Oh, das ist ja sehr, sehr schlecht. Ja? Wenn man sich vor Augen hält. Ja, knapp 15 Millionen bei Black Flag. Syndicate war auch nicht so gut, aber es war auch nicht so scheiße. Also ich fand es schon mit dem Seilwerfer, das war cool. Was ich nicht so cool fand, war die Geschwistersache. Das hätte man ein bisschen besser noch storymäßig verkaufen sollen, finde ich. Ja. ich das letzte Mal schon geschrieben habe, ist das mit den Schiffen natürlich übertrieben, aber gar nicht so unrealistisch. Ja, glaube ich auf jeden Fall, dass die Themse da ordentlich voll war. London war ja auch eine der wichtigsten Städte. Von daher sehr klar, dass die Schifffahrt dort auch nur übertrieben blühte.
Which actually makes it one of the worst-selling Assassin's Creed titles. Fun fact, while Assassin's Creed Syndicate wasn't that successful, the Assassin's Creed series is a huge success. In fact, Ubisoft's best-selling franchise, and in total, a whopping 155 million copies of the games have been sold. After the release of Assassin's Creed Black Flag in 2013, Ubisoft...
Wobei ich glaube, Witcher 3 wurde alleine 40 Millionen immer verkauft. Ist im Verhältnis natürlich sehr, sehr viel, ja, wenn man das auf die ganzen Spiele hochrechnet. Jetzt, warte mal, 2013? Warum steht hier 2013 und nicht 17?
Montreal started developing an Assassin's Creed game set in Egypt. Over a period of 4 years, nearly 1,000 people worked on the game. To make the setting as accurate as possible, historians and Egyptologists were consulted extensively.
So, also zu Origins, das war ja mein richtiger Start in die AC-Serie. Ich habe ja vorher mal AC2 schon gezockt, und AC4 auch, aber mein richtiger Start war Origins und ja, dafür liebe ich das Spiel. Und ich finde es bis heute noch, das ist mein Lieblings-AC. Ja. Witcher 3 ist das beste Spiel aller Zeiten. True, Garok, ja. Du kannst Spieleverkäufe nicht 1:1 vergleichen, auf keinen Fall kann man das, ja. Ist schon richtig. Schon richtig. Heute spielen viel mehr Menschen als früher. Auch das, definitiv. Gaming ist nicht mehr nur für Nerds, sondern ist ziemlich salonfähig geworden. Und Dingoletta, vielen Dank für den salonfähigen Quidmaster, den du mit einem Abo ausstattest. Herzlichen Dank für die Unterstützung.
Assassin's Creed Origins was released in 2017. While Assassin's Creed had been an annual franchise since 2009, Ubisoft spent another year developing Origins to polish the game further. This was largely due to the terrible launch of Unity and disappointing sales figures of Syndicate. The Assassin's Creed series was a decade old, and admittedly, it was beginning to stagnate. So, to keep the loyal fanbase happy, the game added plenty of major changes. One of the most significant changes was the new hitbox combat system. This creates the possibility to miss enemies entirely and makes combat more challenging and thoughtful. There are two types of melee
attacks. Ist auf jeden Fall schwieriger
light
geworden,
attacks,
maßgeblich.
which are weak but fast, and heavy attacks that are slow but powerful. Besides the main story, players can freely roam through the open world of Egypt, complete side missions, explore tombs.
Das war doch einfach so geil, ne? Also die ganzen Rätsel und die Open World. So eine Magie, die dieses Spiel ausstrahlt, wie ich finde. Und dazu das RPG-System, das war schon einfach super.
And pyramids, solve puzzles, and raid bandit hideouts. Players can also fight in a gladiatorial area, with each wave becoming more difficult. Origins has a skill tree with 3 branches to improve the main character, Bayek. Hunter improves his ranged abilities, Warrior his melee abilities, and Seer his assassin abilities. Naval combat also returned back to the series. To make the world more immersive and dynamic.
Moment mal, Naval Combat kam doch nur über diese DLC-Quest, die du als Vorbesteller kriegst, oder dann später, glaube ich, damals waren es ja, glaube ich, noch Uplay Coins, was heute Ubisoft Connect ist. Excalibur, mach's gut. Schön, dass du da warst.
Sandstorms were added, and non-playable characters would have routines, such as working during the daytime and sleeping at night. Many fans had been begging for an Assassin's Creed game set in Egypt, and finally, it was here. Compared to Unity and Syndicate, the game received higher scores and was praised for its story, characters, reworked gameplay, graphics, world design, and historical accuracy. On Metacritic, the game received a score of 81. Origins became a success, and more than 10 million copies have been sold. Fun fact.
Und weniger erfolgreich als AC3 und AC4. Gut, AC4 war auch ein Brecher, aber Origins auch.
Besides the main games, there are also a couple of spin-offs. To mention a few, there was Assassin's Creed Bloodlines, released exclusively for the PlayStation Portable, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, and Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. There was also Assassin's Creed Chronicles, which actually became a different series, consisting of 3 games with new features.
Hey, wait mal, Chronicles India sieht ja wesentlich besser aus als Chronicles China.
New protagonists, and settings. The first game was set in 16th century Imperial China. The second was set in 19th century British India. And the third was set in early 20th century Soviet Russia. If you're wondering how the hell did you miss it and why you've never heard of it, they were 2.5D games. Yep, we see your enthusiasm immediately gone. The 11th major installment in the Assassin's Creed series tells the mythological history of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta from 431 to 422 BC.
Venom, vielen, vielen Dank für den Prime. Odyssey war meiner Meinung nach das Beste, sagst du, mit den DLCs inbegriffen. Total geiles Feeling, total motivierend zu spielen. Du hattest dieses Urlaubsgefühl und auch diesen Spaß, das zu erkunden. Schöne Unterwasserwelten. Das war wirklich auch ein sehr geiles Game, definitiv. Ich glaube, Valhalla steht dem Ganzen etwas nach, einfach durch dieses dunklere, düstere. Du hast nicht so dieses gute Gefühl von diesem Urlaub und dieses türkise Wasser, sondern einfach, du steigst jetzt in den Matsch. Ne, das hast du in Valhalla mehr.
Remember, the fate of Greece journeys with you.
Assassin's Creed Odyssey was released in 2018 for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. Instead of the conflict between the Assassins and Templars, the game focused more on Greek mythology. Players can select to play as Alexios or Cassandra, who are both Greek mercenaries. During the campaign, players can make crucial decisions that can affect the course of the story and lead to several different endings. Other than the plot, Odyssey pretty much follows the footsteps of Origins, with plenty of RPG elements, a huge variety of weapons, and of course, an expansive world to explore. The game is set in Greece, which players can explore on foot, horseback, or with a boat that plays a prominent role in Odyssey. Most fans were happy with the transformation in the series from stealth games to action role-playing games. The game was also praised for its massive open world, gameplay, characters,
Gab aber auch viel
and,
Hate.
of course,
Vor allem
the
von den
incredible
Oldschool-Liebhabern,
graphics.
ne?
IGN said about the game, quote, "While there are definite rough edges, Odyssey sets a new bar for Assassin's Creed games and holds its own in the eternal debate over the best open-world role-playing games ever." The game was criticized for the pacing of the story, and even worse, the microtransactions. Odyssey received a score of 83, and just like its predecessor, over 10 million copies have been sold. And finally,
Genauso erfolgreich scheinbar wie Origins. Krass. Krass, aber Valhalla war natürlich weit erfolgreicher nochmal. Was heißt weit? Schauen wir mal, wie viel erfolgreicher es war. Aber auch viel verbuggter. Na, Valhalla ist schon cool, aber nicht das Beste.
there is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which was released in 2020. Besides the PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, the game was also released for the next generation PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S. The 12th major installment in the series was set in 872 to 878. The game covers a fictional story during the Viking invasion of Britain. The main protagonist of the game is Viking raider Eivor Varinsdottir, who can be customized
Varinsdottir. Völlig entfallen, dass Eivor ja Varinsdottir heißt. Oder wenn man Eivor männlich spielt, natürlich Varinsson. Aber AC3 war auch mega geil. Nicht mein Favorite, aber freue mich sehr, wenn du daran Spaß hattest. Und vielen, vielen Dank dir, Venom, für die 1000 Bits Support. Vielen, vielen Dank. Und ja, viel Spaß, wenn du deinen nächsten Run AC3 machst. Bei mir wird es wahrscheinlich erstmal AC4, wenn ich mir nochmal einen alten Titel demnächst angucke. Oder nochmal AC2. Ja.
Players' liking. The game also introduces new weapons, such as flails and great swords. Players can also dual-wield almost all weapons, including shields. Compared to Odyssey, the game puts more emphasis on stealth aspects and adds a wider range of enemy archetypes that each have their unique way of challenging the player. Another change is that the game focuses more on the selection of skills through skill trees instead.
Das ist jetzt natürlich ein ganz schlechtes Beispiel hier, weil du am Ende alle Fertigkeiten hast. Ja. Wie geil das wäre, einfach nochmal zu spielen, ohne das zu kennen. Ja, das ist halt das Ding, ne? Nordwege, der Anfang ist bombastisch, der Anfang in Englerland ist bombastisch, beziehungsweise Englerland. Die Mitte zieht sich und das Ende ist dann wieder ganz cool. Generell, also es wäre absolut genial, die Fähigkeit zu haben, ein ausgewähltes Videospiel komplett zu vergessen und einfach neu zu erleben. Und das Skilltree ist übertrieben, ja. Am Anfang hattest du auch eine gewisse Motivation da, das Richtige zu machen. Am Ende hattest du einfach alles. Also Valhalla lebt davon, dass du noch nicht alles geschafft hast. Und wenn du alles hast, dann motiviert es nicht mehr. Aber gut, dann hast du halt den Erfolg, alles zu haben und spielst es nie wieder, bis der nächste Patch kommt.
Of the traditional leveling system. Assassin's Creed Valhalla became the most successful launch of any PC game published by Ubisoft. Just 1 week after its launch, the game had over 1.8 million players. Although Valhalla is already a massive game, for players wanting even more content, there are currently 2 expansions available. The first is Wrath of the Druids, which takes place in Ireland. The second
Und wo ich eine Rolle sprechen durfte.
is the Siege of Paris, which sees Ivor travel to France. Another major expansion has
Nicht
yet
die
to be
stärksten
released
DLCs
while
leider.
making this video. Dawn of Ragnarok.
Ja. Dawn of Ragnarok, auch nicht das stärkste DLC aller Zeiten. Leider also, da waren die Teile davor leider etwas stärker. Was heißt leider? Die waren stärker. Und ist ja auch cool, dass die gut waren davor.
According to Ubisoft, it will be, quote, the most ambitious expansion in franchise history. It will expand upon Norse mythology and will be released in March 2022.
Everybody dies und ist Copyright geschützt. Glaubst du, es lohnt sich für 35 €, wenn du ein großer Origins und Odyssey Fan bist? Ja, auf jeden Fall. Auf jeden Fall. Kommt eigentlich gar nicht drauf an. Also wenn du Origins und Odyssey feierst, kannst du das gut dir reinpfeifen. Ja? Wenn du magst, kannst du natürlich hier gucken. Assassin's Creed Valhalla bei Eneba, bei meinem Partner. Gibt es hier für 17, okay, das ist DLC, lul, sorry. Für Xbox für 25 auf jeden Fall. Die Deluxe-Edition für den PC für 32. Ja. Kann man sich gut gönnen. Ja. Code Frag Nart. Falls du möchtest, wie gesagt, Eneba, mein Partner. Weiß nicht, ob du die schon kennst. Kannst du gerne mal reinschneiden. Ansonsten. Aber ja, lohnt sich definitiv da reinzugucken, wenn man großer Fan von Origins und Odyssey ist. Weil eigentlich will man halt nur mehr von dieser Art, wenn man RPG-Fan ist. So und ja, insgeheim wünschen wir uns doch alle nur ein Witcher 4, oder? Everybody dies. Ach komm. Hör doch auf, Billy. Ich will den Ton wieder anmachen dürfen.
Generally speaking, Assassin's Creed Valhalla was well received. It was praised for its music, visuals, characters, narrative, and world, but was criticized for its length and technical issues. The PlayStation 5 version of Valhalla received a score of 84. From the first Assassin's Creed game released in 2007 all the way to Assassin's Creed Valhalla released in 2020, it is truly unbelievable how much the series has evolved over its 15-year history. Ubisoft is not planning to stop the franchise anytime soon and is currently working on another major installment for the Assassin's Creed franchise, which is expected to be titled Assassin's Creed Infinity. According to rumors, it will bring major changes to the series, so I'm very excited to see how Assassin's Creed will continue to evolve. Subscribe for more Evolution videos and please like the video.
Cooles Video auf jeden Fall von Flat Life. Kann man sich gut mal reinpfeifen, wa? Kann man sich gut mal reinpfeifen. Nicht schlecht.